What's good, y'all? My name is Zach Young, and welcome back to Young Money Sports. And today, I just wanted to talk about the NFL draft and what all happened this weekend, mainly from the Broncos' perspective, but there are still a few stories that are not regarding the Broncos that I want to talk about first. And then once I get through all the draft picks, I'll go over their free agent acquisitions, mainly the important ones, and kind of give my thoughts on how I think they'll be this upcoming season. Now, the two non-Broncos stories both revolve around former Colorado Buffaloes. The first one being when the Browns traded the number 2 pick to the Jaguars in exchange for an array of day 2 and day 3 picks, but mainly they got back the Jags' 2026 first round pick. Now, seeing this all go down live, I was very perplexed from really both sides, because the Browns had an opportunity to get Travis Hunter, who was deemed this once in a lifetime kind of talent. He was a two-way player, just won the Heisman. Like, he was a generational kind of talent that you would love to have on your team, especially the Browns, who don't really have a lot of great offensive pieces. And Hunter would have been the first step into building another solid offense. But they did still get the 5th overall pick, which they used to get Mason Graham, and they got the Jaguars' 2026 first round pick, which is why I'm also perplexed from Jacksonville's end. Like, they must be really hoping that Hunter can just completely turn their offense around and turn them into a good team, both offensively and defensively, because, man, trading a first-round pick this close to when you've been horrible and show no real signs of getting, significantly better can turn out disastrous. I mean, look what we saw with the Panthers a couple of years ago, trading multiple first-round picks so they could draft Bryce Young. It does look a little questionable right now, but if Hunter ends up panning out and Jacksonville ends up getting back to a contending form like we've seen sparsely in recent years, then this GM is just going to look like a genius. But the biggest story by far, and not just from Colorado, but just the entire draft in general, was the seemingly never-ending slide of Shedeur Sanders on the draft boards. I remember seeing throughout the year that Shedeur was a consensus at least first-round pick, but some people had him going near the top, top 10, and there were even some people who thought he could be top 3 or even number 1. But leading up to the draft, we started to see his value tank a little more. Before it was at number 8. I saw things afterwards that said it was going to be number 21, and eventually he would fall out of the first round entirely. While I did think this was kind of crazy considering what we were expecting, at least I think everyone figured that he was going to go in round 2 or at the latest round 3. Because I will say, in the first round, after maybe the first 10 or so picks, those teams that were after that, up to pick 21 where the Steelers were, they didn't need a quarterback. So it wasn't expected at all that Shedeur was going to go in between picks 9 and 21. What did surprise me is that the Steelers ended up passing up on him, but maybe they figured they could maybe get him in round 2, or they were still in talks with Aaron Rodgers. But then day 2 came and went, and he still wasn't off the board. There were multiple teams that could have used him, like the Browns, the Steelers, the Raiders, teams that could have used a starting quarterback, or teams that could have used him as a bench guy that could have worked his way up to the starting spot during the year. They just kept passing up on him. And we even saw other quarterbacks like Jalen Milroe and Dillon Gabriel get picked before Shedeur. And he didn't end up getting picked up until pick 144 in the 5th round by the Cleveland Browns, who just picked Dillon Gabriel the day before in round 3. It became very obvious that this was more than just his football talent and what people thought about his talent. There was clearly something else going on, and we would learn later that his interviews before the draft were just horrible, and his whole pre-draft process was really what tanked his value. He didn't participate in the combine, he only interviewed with a select number of teams, and supposedly the interviews that he had with those teams were absolutely awful. Apparently he came off as very arrogant, he was blaming his teammates for a lot of things. Overall, it just left a very sour taste in the mouths of a lot of GMs who were at one time trying to pick him up and get him on their team. Which just makes it more confusing why the Browns would pick him up, especially after they drafted Dillon Gabriel on day 2. Why would you pick up Shedeur after getting Dillon Gabriel? It just makes no sense for your scheme or anything, because if you wanted Shedeur that badly, why would you not just take him in day 2? Because now, the Browns, after drafting Gabriel and Shedeur, have 5 quarterbacks on their roster. Well, 4 if we're not counting the injured Bill Cosby. And I know what you're thinking. Well, yeah, now they're going to trade one away or cut one. They're not going to go into a season with 5 quarterbacks. But wait now, because I have a proposition for them. And you just hear me out here. So the Browns can dress probably 4 quarterbacks in a game, and they should run it like a bullpen, like baseball. So you have a starting quarterback, a setup quarterback, a relief quarterback, and then a closing quarterback if you're up or down 1 or 2 possessions late in the fourth quarter. And they can take their pick with who they want in each position. Like, there's no set spot yet, but I think it'd be really interesting. They should go ahead and try that, because, you know, the Browns are already going to be ass. Like, there's no reason to think that they're going to be good, even with Shedeur or anybody starting behind center this year. Like, they should just go ahead and try it and just see what it looks like. But now we'll get into the Broncos picks. So, you know, sort of like last year, I'll go over each pick one by one and just give my thoughts on, you know, how I feel about them. So with the 20th pick in the first round, the Broncos selected Jahdae Barron, who's a cornerback from Texas. Now, this isn't necessarily what I envisioned with the Broncos' 20th pick. I was really hoping they would get a running back or a receiver. I know the Bucs picked Emeka Egbuka before this pick, so that was probably what the Broncos were hoping for, but now they had to pick a guy who's... It looked like it was just the best player available, at least that's what they said after they picked him. And that's what it really feels like. You know, the Broncos' cornerback spot was not necessarily their biggest need, but it is good to get a guy who can be a second option for Pat Surtain. You know, now you have a great guy on both sides, because Riley Moss, I think, can be good, but he definitely showed signs that he isn't really ready to be that second guy just yet. So now you're hoping that Barron can be that guy next to Pat Surtain, and also he looks like he's a dog too. Like, he looks like he can lay people out, so that's always a good sign. Now, I know when I first saw this pick announced, I was pissed because I really wanted a running back or wide receiver, since those are our biggest needs, but maybe that's a good sign for Barron, because in recent times, all the Broncos first round picks that I've hated, like Bo Nix or Garrett Bowles, have ended up turning into, you know, good or even all-pro level players. And all the guys that I liked in the first round, like Bradley Chubb and Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant, ended up being injury-prone and mid. With the 60th pick in the second round, the Broncos selected R.J. Harvey, who's a running back from UCF. Hey, look at that, the Broncos actually tried to fill a position of need through the draft. This is one of the two major needs that the Broncos had. You know, going into this, the Broncos had wide receiver and running back on their board, and any Broncos fan could tell you that's exactly what they needed. Denver's running game was arguably one of the worst in the NFL last year, so it's good they're trying to get it going again with Harvey, who is one of the fastest running backs in this draft class, and he has the ability to both shed tackles and get into space, and he also has some ability in the passing game as well. He's a guy who lets a play develop, and he really trusts his offensive line, which is good for the Broncos because their offensive line, especially run blocking, I didn't think was too bad last year. So maybe this is finally what we need to kickstart our run game, which has been pretty dormant for like the last decade now, it feels like. Like, besides Phillip Lindsay's Linsanity run a couple of years ago, the Broncos haven't had a solid running back since, like, what, CJ Anderson a decade ago? And Harvey should be able to work his way up to being the starting running back, considering that the Broncos' running back room is fairly weak. Up next, with a 74th pick in the third round, the Broncos selected Pat Bryant, who's a wide receiver from Illinois. I don't know, man. This is the first pick in this draft where I was really, like, scratching my head. Like, I think this was kind of a reach. Like, Bryant isn't bad per se. Like, he is a solid wide receiver. He's tall and seems like he can make contested catches, but he's also tall and slow. I think he ran one of the slowest 40 times at the combine for a receiver. I guess they were picking a guy who was more fitting to their offense, considering that they have another big, tall, slower wide receiver in Devon Vele, who they use in their offense, mainly for screens and blocking. But personally, I really wanted them to draft a guy like Jalen Noel, who is a very fast wide receiver, and that's something that the Broncos offense really needs. It would be nice to have a faster wide receiver who can get separation but also make catches through contact. But now we're just reaching for another guy who's just going to be used for screens and run blocking probably. But moving on now, with the 101st pick in the third round, the Broncos selected Sai'vion Jones, who's an edge rusher from LSU. Now, they actually traded up to get this pick, so clearly they saw something. Like, they really wanted this dude, and, you know, he's a behemoth. He's 6'5", 280, so I really don't blame them at all for trying to go get him. It is kind of strange to me that the Broncos are looking to add to their defensive line, considering that the defensive line from last year is probably their best and most well-rounded unit. They did mention that guys like Zach Allen and Nick Bonito were both going to be free agents after this year, but wouldn't you want to re-sign two of your all-pro defensive linemen? I'm hoping they can manage to re-sign those two, but, you know, maybe they just can't pass up on a guy who's 6'5" and 280. I guess for a position like defensive line where you're playing more than one guy at different rotations, like, it's okay to have more depth than not enough at that kind of spot, because he does also seem kind of versatile. Like, he does seem to have an impact both on the interior and as an edge rusher. So maybe he can bring more to our pass rush and run defense than some of our other rotation guys. And that's probably why they also picked, with pick 134 in the 4th round, they got Q Robinson, who's also an edge rusher from Alabama. I don't really have an insane amount to say about this guy, because he seems to have some similar skill sets to Sai'vion, but he doesn't seem to do it as effectively. He only started in 5 games last year for Alabama. I don't think he's going to get a lot of time in the Broncos defensive line rotation, because it is pretty stacked in terms of quality edge rushers and interior defensive guys. So the only time I can really see him getting on the field is maybe on special teams right now, kind of like the draft analysis says. And speaking of guys that I will not have a whole lot to say about, with the 216th pick in the 6th round, the Broncos picked up Jeremy Crawshaw, who's a punter from Florida. Like I said, I don't really have much to say. He seems like a good punter. He's 2nd overall position ranked. The Broncos lost Riley Dixon in the offseason, so I guess it makes sense to go get a punter. Don't know about getting one in the draft, but I guess it's good that we now have security at the punter position. And rounding out this Broncos draft with the 241st pick in the 7th round, the Broncos selected Caleb Lohner, who's a tight end from Utah. Now, kind of like last year's 7th round pick from Utah, this dude's story is a lot more interesting than what I could say about what he can contribute on the football field, because he actually went to BYU in 2020 to play basketball. And then he went from BYU to Baylor to play basketball, played a couple years there, really didn't do a whole lot, and so he transferred to Utah in his final year to play football, where he had 4 catches for 54 yards, and all 4 of those catches were touchdowns. I don't think this dude's going to be really cracking the depth chart at tight end. At the most, I think he may get a couple reps during the preseason, and he's mainly going to spend a lot of time both on the practice squad, or maybe he can work his way up to being, on special teams. And that is the 2025 Denver Broncos draft class. And man, after the first 2 picks, it just gets a little, I wouldn't say bad, but kind of underwhelming. I don't think a lot of these guys are really going to wow us or get to a super crazy high level, but I don't think that they're really going to just be horrible either, if that makes any sense. It's just a very mid draft class. It just feels very mid. After Barron and Harvey, I really don't feel like any of these guys are going to have a long-term impact on this team. And I hope I'm wrong, but that's just what it feels like. I was hoping that the main goal going into this draft was to try to get Bo Nix some good help on the offense, and we really didn't do a great job of getting any of that done. Both offensive players that we took were seen as reaches, and the defensive players that we got just seemed like we were trying to fix things that aren't broken. But before I sign off here, I do want to give my quick thoughts on the Broncos offseason acquisitions. Their 3 main pickups in free agency were linebacker Dre Greenlaw, safety Talanoa Hufanga, and tight end Evan Engram. Personally, I love all of these signings, especially signing those 2 dudes from the 49ers. They're really filling positions of need on the defense, and the defense was already pretty good last year, but linebacker and defensive back were both spots that we really needed some depth at and some good starting players, and we tried to fill those positions with Greenlaw and Hufanga. And we also finally, for what feels like the first time in forever, we have a legitimate option at tight end. I know Evan Engram isn't exactly what many expected him to be, but he's still a lot better option than somebody like Adam Troutman or Nate Atkins. But man, even with all this, there better be some more development on the offensive side, because we really didn't do a great job of giving Bo Nix any more options to work with. And if there's no development and we just stagnate or get any worse, this season could be very, very mid. But that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what y'all think about any of this stuff, the Broncos draft, Shedeur Sanders, how y'all's teams did in the draft. Just let me know any of that in the comments below. But like, subscribe if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all later.
Streak last week, we played well.
Woo!
We played well.
Best rookie in the class, baby.
And then...